The history of Iran begins long before the formation of large empires. It starts with early human settlements that appeared thousands of years ago. These early communities developed in a region that was both diverse and challenging. The land included mountains, deserts, and fertile plains. Each environment shaped the way people lived. Some groups settled in valleys where water was available. Others adapted to harsher conditions in more arid areas. Over time, these communities began to develop agriculture. They learned how to grow crops and manage water resources. This allowed populations to grow. Small settlements slowly became more organized. Villages formed. Then larger centers of activity began to appear. One of the earliest known civilizations in this region was Elam. The Elamites lived in the southwestern part of what is now Iran. Their main center was located in Susa. This city became an important place for administration and trade. The Elamite civilization developed its own system of writing. It also created structures for governance. These early systems allowed for coordination between different groups. Trade began to expand. Goods moved between regions. This included metals, textiles, and agricultural products. Over time, connections formed between neighboring civilizations, including Mesopotamia to the west. These interactions influenced development. Ideas moved across regions. Technologies were shared. Cultural elements began to spread. The land that would later become known as Persia was already part of a wider network. A network of movement, exchange, and gradual development. These early stages were not defined by rapid change. They were shaped by slow progress. Step by step. Over generations. The foundations of future societies were built during this time. Not through sudden transformation, but through consistent adaptation. Through observation, through repetition. And as these early civilizations continued to develop, the region became more structured, more connected, more prepared for the emergence of larger systems. Systems that would later form one of the most influential empires in history. As time moved forward, the structure of the region began to change. Small groups and early civilizations were gradually replaced by larger systems of power. One of the most important figures in this transformation was Cyrus the Great. He was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, an empire that would become one of the largest in the ancient world. Cyrus was born around 600 BCE. He was part of the Persian people who lived in the southwestern region of Iran. At that time, the area was divided into different groups and territories. Many of these were under the control of the Median Empire. Cyrus began his rise by uniting the Persian tribes. This was not a sudden event. It developed gradually, through alliances, through leadership, through a steady consolidation of power. Eventually, he challenged the Median ruler. The conflict ended with Cyrus taking control of the region. This marked the beginning of a new political structure. From this point forward, expansion continued. Cyrus extended his influence across neighboring lands. of his most significant achievements was the conquest of Lydia, a region known for its wealth and resources. Later, he moved toward Babylon. At that time, Babylon was one of the most important cities in the world. It had strong walls, advanced systems, and a long history of power. However, Cyrus was able to enter the city without major destruction. This approach was different from many previous conquests. Instead of destroying local systems, he often allowed them to continue. Local traditions and religions were respected. This created stability. It also allowed the empire to function more effectively. One well-known example of this policy was the return of displaced peoples to their homelands, including the Jewish population that had been exiled in Babylon. This approach contributed to his reputation as a ruler, not only as a conqueror, but as an organizer, a builder of systems. Over time, the Achaemenid Empire expanded across a vast area, from parts of Central Asia to the Eastern Mediterranean. This required structure, administration, coordination across long distances. Cyrus established the foundation for these systems that would later be expanded by his successors. His leadership marked a turning point. The region was no longer a collection of separate groups. It had become part of a larger, connected empire. And within this transformation, a new phase of history began to unfold. One defined by scale, organization, and continuity. After the rule of Cyrus the Great, the empire continued to develop under new leadership. One of the most important rulers who followed was Darius the Great. He came to power around 522 BCE. At that time, the empire was already large. However, it still required organization and structure to function effectively. Darius focused on strengthening the internal systems of the empire. He understood that managing such a large territory required clear administration. One of his key contributions was the division of the empire into regions known as satrapies. Each satrapy was governed by an official called a satrap. These officials were responsible for collecting taxes and maintaining order. This system allowed the central government to maintain control across vast distances. Communication was also important. To improve this, Darius developed a network of roads. One of the most well-known routes was the Royal Road. It connected different parts of the empire and allowed messages to travel more quickly. This improved coordination between regions. It also supported trade and movement. Another important development was the introduction of a standardized currency. This made economic activity more efficient. Trade became easier. Transactions became more consistent. Darius also supported large construction projects. One of the most notable was the city of Persepolis. This became a ceremonial center of the empire. It reflected both power and organization. Its structures were carefully designed and built over time. Under his leadership, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. It included parts of Asia, the Middle East, and sections of Europe. This scale required constant management. The systems he established allowed the empire to remain stable, even as it continued to expand. However, expansion also brought challenges. Conflicts arose with other regions, including the Greek city-states. These conflicts marked the beginning of a new phase, one that involved both administration and external pressure. Despite these challenges, the structure created by Darius remained effective. It allowed the empire to function as a connected system, not just a collection of territories. His rule demonstrated the importance of organization, of planning, of long-term systems. And through these contributions, the foundation of the empire became stronger, more structured, and more capable of sustaining its scale over time. As the Achaemenid Empire reached its greatest size, new challenges began to appear. Expansion had connected many regions, but it also brought the empire into contact with other powerful societies. One of the most significant of these was the Greek world. The Greek city-states were organized differently. They were not part of a single empire. Instead, they functioned as independent political units. Each city had its own system of governance. This created a different kind of structure, one that did not easily fit into imperial control. Tensions began to rise in regions along the western edge of the Persian Empire, particularly in areas near the Aegean Sea. Some Greek cities in this region had already come under Persian influence. However, maintaining control over these areas proved difficult. Local resistance began to form. This led to a series of conflicts, often referred to as the Greco-Persian Wars. One of the earliest major events was the Ionian Revolt. Greek cities in Asia Minor attempted to break away from Persian control. The revolt was eventually suppressed, but it revealed the difficulty of managing distant regions with different systems. Later, Persian forces moved toward mainland Greece. One of the most well-known events during this period was the Battle of Marathon. This took place in 490 BCE. The Persian army advanced toward Athens. However, the Greek forces were able to resist. This marked a significant moment, not because it ended the conflict, but because it showed that expansion had limits. Further campaigns followed, including those under Xerxes, who succeeded Darius. Large forces moved across land and sea, reaching deep into Greek territory. Battles such as Thermopylae and Salamis became part of this larger conflict. Each event reflected the scale of the empire, but also the complexity of sustaining expansion. These conflicts did not immediately end Persian influence, but they slowed further expansion into Europe. They also demonstrated that different political systems required different approaches. The empire remained strong. Its internal structure continued to function, but external expansion became more difficult. And as these conflicts continued, the focus gradually shifted from expansion to maintaining stability within existing borders. This marked a transition from rapid growth to careful management of a vast and complex system. As the conflicts with the Greek city-states continued, the structure of the Persian Empire began to shift, not in its foundation, but in its priorities. The period of rapid expansion had slowed. The empire had reached a size that required constant attention. Maintaining stability became more important than gaining new territory. The leadership focused on preserving the existing system. Satrapies continued to function as regional centers of administration. Each region remained connected to the central authority. Taxes were collected. Communication networks remained active. The royal road continued to support movement across long distances. These systems allowed the empire to remain unified, despite its vast size. At the same time, new challenges appeared. Internal tensions developed in some regions. Managing diverse populations required careful coordination. Different languages, different traditions, different local systems, all existed within the same imperial structure. This complexity required balance. Leaders had to ensure that local systems could continue while maintaining overall control. This was not always easy. Occasionally, local revolts occurred. These were not constant, but they reflected the difficulty of governing large territories. Responses were organized, not sudden, not uncontrolled, but structured, designed to restore stability. The empire also continued to interact with neighboring regions. Trade remained active. Goods moved across established routes. Economic activity supported the overall system. Despite the earlier conflicts, connections between regions did not disappear. They adapted, shifted, continued in different forms. Over time, the empire entered a phase of sustained structure. Less focused on expansion, more focused on maintenance, more focused on continuity. This phase required patience, consistency, long-term thinking. The systems created by earlier rulers continued to function. They provided a framework that allowed the empire to remain stable, even as external pressures continued. And as time moved forward, this balance between control and flexibility became essential. It allowed the Persian Empire to remain one of the most organized and structured systems of its time, not through constant change, but through steady, continuous management. As time continued, the direction of the empire began to change. Not suddenly, not as a collapse, but as a gradual shift. The period of expansion had reached its limits. The empire had grown across vast territories, from Central Asia to the Eastern Mediterranean. Managing such a wide region required constant coordination. And over time, this became more difficult. External conflicts had slowed expansion. Internal complexity required more attention. The focus shifted toward maintaining control rather than extending it. This marked a turning point. The systems created by earlier rulers remained strong. The administrative structure continued to function. pace of growth had changed. It was no longer expanding rapidly. Instead, it was stabilizing, balancing different regions, maintaining connections, ensuring continuity. At the same time, new forces began to appear beyond the borders. Other powers were developing. New forms of organization were emerging. These changes were not immediate threats, but they indicated a shift in the broader world. Within the empire, leadership continued. Successors maintained the structure. However, over time, the central authority became less consistent. Not all rulers had the same level of control. Not all decisions carried the same weight. This created small variations within the system. Gradual, subtle, but noticeable. The empire remained large. It remained organized. But it required more effort to maintain stability. As time passed, these small changes began to accumulate, not in a single moment, but across years, across generations. This gradual shift prepared the ground for the next major transformation, a transformation that would come from outside, to a force that moved quickly, differently, with a new type of structure. This force would eventually challenge the stability of the Persian Empire. And as this moment approached, the balance between stability and change became more fragile, not broken, but shifting slowly toward a new phase of history. As the Persian Empire continued to maintain its structure, a new force began to emerge from the west. This force was led by Alexander of Macedon, later known as Alexander the Great. He came from a different political system, a different military structure, a different approach to expansion. At a relatively young age, he began a campaign that would extend far beyond his original territory. His movement was fast, coordinated, focused, unlike the gradual expansion of the Persian Empire. His approach was direct. It moved quickly across regions, engaging in a series of decisive encounters. The Persian Empire at this time was still large, still organized, still functioning. However, its structure was designed for long-term stability, not rapid response to fast-moving forces. As Alexander advanced, he moved through Asia Minor, then further into territories under Persian control. One of the key moments in this process was the Battle of Isis. This took place in 3333 BCE. The Persian king Darius III led the imperial forces. The encounter represented a clash between two systems, a long-established empire and a rapidly advancing force. The outcome shifted the balance. Alexander continued his movement, advancing toward key regions of the empire. Another major confrontation occurred at the Battle of Gaugamela. This took place in 331 BCE. It became one of the most significant moments in the decline of Persian control. After this, the structure of the empire began to weaken, not instantly, not completely, but gradually. Key cities fell under administrative systems were disrupted. The central authority became less effective. Despite its long-standing structure, the empire could not maintain its previous stability. Over time, the territories that once formed a unified system were reorganized under a different form of leadership. Alexander's approach introduced new connections, new systems, new transitions. This marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another. The Persian Empire, which had developed over centuries, did not disappear suddenly, but it entered a period of transformation. One that would reshape the region for generations to come. After the campaigns of Alexander the Great, the structure of the region entered a new phase. The Persian Empire, which had once functioned as a unified system, was no longer under a single authority. However, the transition was not immediate, and it was not simple. Alexander had created a vast territory, but maintaining this territory required organization. After his death in 3233 BCE, control of the region became divided. His generals, often referred to as the Diadochi, began to compete for authority. This led to the formation of several successor states. One of the most important of these was the Seleucid Empire. This system attempted to maintain control over large parts of the former Persian territories. The Seleucid rulers introduced elements of Greek administration. They also established new cities. These cities often reflected Hellenistic design and organization. However, the region itself remained diverse. Local traditions did not disappear. They continued quietly, steadily, within the new structure. The interaction between Greek influence and local culture created a unique environment. Not fully Greek, not fully Persian, but a combination of both. Over time, this system faced its own challenges. The territory was large, difficult to manage. Local resistance appeared in some regions. New powers began to rise. One of the most important of these was the Parthian Empire. The Parthians gradually took control of eastern territories. Their approach differed from the Seleucid system. They relied more on regional autonomy, less on centralized control. This allowed them to expand steadily. Over time, they replaced Seleucid authority in many areas. This marked another transition, from one system to another, from one structure to the next. The region continued to evolve, not through a single change, but through a series of adjustments, each phase building on the last, each system adapting to the conditions of the time. And within this ongoing transformation, the foundations of later Iranian states began to take shape, not as a return to the past, but as a continuation, a steady development within a changing world. As the transition period continued, new systems began to establish stronger control over the region. One of the most important developments was the rise of the Parthian Empire. The Parthians emerged from the eastern regions of Iran. Their growth was gradual. Step by step, they expanded their influence. Unlike earlier centralized systems, the Parthian structure allowed for more regional flexibility. Local leaders maintained a degree of autonomy. This created a different type of balance, a system that could adapt more easily to local conditions. Over time, the Parthians became a major power. They controlled large parts of Iran and surrounding regions. They also came into contact with another expanding system, the Roman Empire. This created a new form of interaction, not only conflict, but also exchange. Trade routes connected the two powers. Goods moved across long distances. Cultural elements were shared. At the same time, military encounters occurred along their borders. These interactions shaped the region for centuries. Eventually, another transition began. The Sasanian Empire rose to power in the 3rd century CE. This marked a return to a more centralized system. The Sasanian rulers placed emphasis on structure and organization. They reestablished strong administrative control. Religion also played an important role during this period. Zoroastrianism became closely linked to the state. As time continued, the region once again approached a major transformation. The Sasanian Empire, which had maintained stability for centuries, began to weaken. Not suddenly, but gradually. Internal challenges increased. External pressures became stronger. At the same time, a new force began to emerge from the Arabian Peninsula. This force introduced a new system, a new structure, a new form of organization. In the 7th century, Arab Muslim armies advanced into the region. They encountered the Sasanian forces. A series of conflicts followed. Over time, the existing structure of the Sasanian Empire began to dissolve. This marked the beginning of a new phase. The region became part of the expanding Islamic world. However, this transition was not simply a replacement. It was a transformation. Local traditions did not disappear. They continued. But within a new framework, the Persian language evolved. It absorbed new influences, new vocabulary, new forms of expression. Cultural development continued. Literature, science, and philosophy expanded during this period. Cities remained important centers. Trade routes continued to function. Connections between regions remained active. The structure of governance also adapted. Different dynasties and local authorities emerged over time, each one operating within the broader Islamic system. This created a layered structure, not fully centralized, not completely local, but balanced. Over time, Persian identity remained strong, even as political systems changed. Cultural continuity became an important factor. It connected past and present. It allowed traditions to evolve without disappearing. was not defined by sudden change, but by adaptation, by integration, by gradual transformation. And as this new phase developed, the region entered a long period of cultural growth, one that would influence not only Iran, but also neighboring regions. Through language, through knowledge, through shared systems of thought. And within this transformation, a new identity began to form, not separate from the past, but built upon it, carried forward into a new historical phase. As the new structure of the region continued to develop, a period of cultural growth began to take shape, not through rapid change, but through steady development. This period is often described as a golden age, a time when knowledge expanded, when ideas moved across regions, when culture became a central part of life. The Persian language evolved during this time. It adapted to new influences. It became a tool for literature, for communication, and for intellectual expression. Poetry became an important form of cultural identity. Writers created works that explored history, philosophy, and human experience. These works were not limited to one place. They spread across regions. They were shared, copied, and preserved. At the same time, scientific development increased. Scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Knowledge was collected, organized, expanded. This was not done in isolation. It was part of a larger network, a network that connected different regions of the Islamic world. Cities became centers of learning, places where scholars gathered, where ideas were exchanged, where knowledge was developed over time. Trade continued to play a role. Goods moved across long distances, but so did ideas. This created a connection between regions, a shared space of learning and culture. The structure of society supported this growth. Institutions developed. Systems of education expanded. Knowledge became part of daily life, not only for specialists, but for broader communities. This period was not defined by a single event. It was a process, a gradual expansion of thought, of creativity, of understanding. And within this steady development, Persian culture became a central part of a larger system, influencing neighboring regions, contributing to shared knowledge, and continuing a tradition of cultural continuity, built over centuries, carried forward through time. And as this period continued, it shaped the identity of the region in lasting ways, not through force, but through knowledge, through expression, through steady, continuous growth. As this period of cultural development continued, the structure of the region began to shift once again. Not abruptly, not in a single moment, but gradually, over time. The systems that had supported cultural growth began to change. New powers emerged. Different dynasties took control of various regions, each bringing its own structure, its own priorities, its own way of governing. This created a series of transitions, not one clear shift, but multiple phases, each building on the last. The region remained connected. Trade routes continued. Cultural exchange remained active. But political authority became more fragmented. Over time, larger centralized systems began to reappear. One of the most important of these was the Safavid Empire. This marked a significant turning point. It introduced a new level of central authority. It also established a stronger connection between political power and religious identity. This created a more unified structure within the region. At the same time, external interactions continued. The region remained connected to neighboring powers, including the Ottoman Empire to the west and various Central Asian systems to the east. These interactions shaped development. They influenced decisions. They affected long-term stability. As time continued, the region entered a new phase, one that moved gradually toward what we now recognize as modern Iran. This transition was not immediate. It unfolded slowly, across generations, each phase connected to the previous one. Nothing was lost completely. Instead, each stage contributed to the next. Structures changed, systems adapted, but continuity remained. A connection between past and present. And as this transition continued, the foundations of modern Iran began to take form, not through a single event, but through a long process of development, one that carried forward the influence of earlier civilizations into a new historical period, shaped by both continuity and change. As time continues to move forward, the region enters what we now describe as modern Iran. This stage is not separate from the past. It is connected, built upon centuries of development. The structures that existed before have changed, but their influence remains. Modern Iran is shaped by multiple layers of history. Ancient empires, cultural transformation, political change, each one contributing to the present. The country operates within a defined system, a structured form of governance, institutions that manage different aspects of daily life, administration, economy, communication, all functioning within an organized framework. At the same time, cultural identity remains strong. Language, traditions, historical memory. These elements continue to connect the present to the past. Cities have expanded. Infrastructure has developed. Technology has become part of daily life. But the connection to history remains visible, not always directly, but through continuity, through patterns, through shared identity. The rhythm of life continues, not identical to the past, but not completely different either. It is an extension, a continuation, adapted to new conditions, shaped by new systems, but still connected to earlier foundations. Modern Iran exists within a global context. It interacts with other countries through trade, through communication, through shared systems. These interactions influence development. They shape future direction. At the same time, internal structure remains important. Balance between tradition and change, between continuity and adaptation. As time continues, this balance evolves, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, over time. And within this ongoing process, the story does not end. It continues, carried forward through generations, shaped by both past and present. And as we step back from this long journey, we can see the full structure, from early civilizations to empires to transformation to the present. A continuous flow, unbroken, enduring. And now, as this moment settles, we allow the rhythm to slow, the movement to soften, the story to rest, not ending, but posing within calm, within stillness, within a quiet